Most of the bread we eat today looks harmless, soft, white, and perfectly sliced. But inside your body, a lot of it behaves more like a slow poison, spiking your blood sugar, feeding inflammation, and leaving you hungry again an hour later. 800 years ago, ordinary villagers were eating bread that did the opposite. Their daily loaves kept them full during 10-hour workdays, stabilized their energy, fed their gut bacteria, and quietly protected them against disease. So what was so special about medieval bread? And how did we turn this ancient superfood into one of the most overrated junk foods in the modern diet? In this video, we'll go back into medieval kitchens and village bakehouses to see exactly how their bread was grown, milled, fermented, and baked, and what you can copy today, even if you live in a tiny modern apartment. Let's start with a single slice of bread and the surprising story it tells. When we say medieval bread, we're not talking about one single recipe. Europe in the Middle Ages stretched from icy Scandinavia to sun-soaked Mediterranean coasts, and every region had its own grains, its own ovens, and its own traditions. But there are a few things most medieval breads had in common, and these things make them radically different from most of the bread we eat today. First, the grains. Medieval farmers grew older varieties of wheat, like emmer, einkorn, and spelt, along with rye, barley, and sometimes oats. These ancient grains were tougher, more resistant to poor soil and cold climates, and far less hybridized than the modern high-yield wheat we use now. They were also typically eaten as whole grains. That means the bran and the germ, the parts richest in vitamins, minerals, healthy fats, and fiber, were left in, not stripped away. White flour did exist in the Middle Ages, but it was rare, expensive, and mostly reserved for the nobility and the church. The average peasant family ate dark, heavy loaves made from coarse wholemeal flour or mixed grains. From a modern nutrition perspective, those dark loaves were far superior to the soft white bread that later became fashionable. Second, the milling process. To turn grain into flour, medieval communities used stone mills, often powered by water wheels or windmills. As the heavy stones slowly rotated, they crushed the entire grain into a slightly coarse flour. This slow, relatively cool process helped preserve the delicate vitamins and fats in the grain. There were no steel rollers spinning at high speed, no intense heat stripping away nutrients. In many cases, people milled grain in small batches, baking with flour that was only a day or two old. The result was flour that was fresh, aromatic, and full of natural oils. Third, fermentation. Here is where medieval bread really starts to look like a superfood. In most medieval villages, yeast in little packets did not exist. Instead, bakers relied on wild fermentation, what we now call sourdough. They kept a living mixture of flour and water, full of wild yeasts and lactic acid bacteria from the environment. Some of these starters were passed down for years, even generations. When they made bread, they mixed this sourdough starter with freshly milled flour and water, added some salt, and then they waited. The dough was left to ferment for many hours, often overnight or longer, at cool room temperatures. During this long, slow fermentation, the bacteria and yeasts started a microscopic feast. They broke down complex carbohydrates into simpler forms. They partially digested gluten and other proteins. They released organic acids that slowed down mold and harmful microbes. And they made minerals like iron, zinc, and magnesium more available for the human body to absorb. In other words, the fermentation pre-digested the bread, turning it into a food that was far gentler on the gut and far more nourishing per slice. Fourth, the baking method. Medieval ovens were usually heavy, thick-walled structures made of stone or clay. They were heated by burning wood directly inside. Once the interior was blazing hot, the embers were raked out, and the bread went in to bake in the stored heat. These ovens gave bread a thick, robust crust and a moist interior crumb. The high heat created complex flavors through caramelization and Maillard reactions without the need for added sugar, oil, or artificial flavor enhancers. Every step of this process, from growing older grain varieties to stone milling and long fermentation in a sourdough culture to baking in a wood-fired oven, created a loaf that was dense, rich, and deeply satisfying. Now, let's look more closely at what that meant for nutrition. For medieval peasants, bread wasn't just a side dish. In many regions, bread made up 40 to 60% of a person's daily calories. If bread had been empty calories, people simply could not have survived the long winters, the heavy farm work, and the frequent periods of scarcity. So what did that typical dark, sour loaf actually contain? 1. Whole grain vitamins and minerals. Because medieval bread was usually made from whole or nearly whole grains, it contained all three parts of the grain. The bran, rich in fiber, B vitamins, and antioxidants. The germ, containing vitamin E, healthy fats, and important minerals. And the endosperm, providing complex carbohydrates and some protein. The combination gave medieval bread more B vitamins for energy metabolism, more magnesium and potassium for muscle and nerve function, more zinc and iron for blood and immune health, and significantly more fiber than typical modern white bread. High fiber content. That fiber did more than prevent constipation. It slowed down the digestion of carbohydrates, leading to a gentler rise in blood sugar after eating. It also fed beneficial gut bacteria, supporting a healthier microbiome, something science is now linking to everything from mood and immunity to body weight and inflammation. Many modern people struggle to get enough fiber in their diet. For medieval villagers, their daily bread was one of the biggest sources of it. High protein and healthy fats. Grain isn't just starch. Whole grains contain a decent amount of protein, and the germ includes small but meaningful amounts of healthy fats. In medieval bread, this meant that calories did not come only from simple carbs. They came from a balanced combination of complex carbs, protein, and fat, which helped keep people satisfied longer. The magic of sourdough fermentation. The real secret weapon, though, was the long sourdough fermentation. Modern research has shown that sourdough fermentation can reduce the glycemic index of bread, meaning it causes a slower, steadier rise in blood sugar, break down part of the gluten, making the bread easier to digest for some people who are sensitive to wheat but not truly celiac, decrease anti-nutrients like phytic acid, making minerals like iron and zinc more bioavailable, produce beneficial organic acids that may support gut health. In practical terms, this meant that a heavy slice of medieval sourdough bread gave a person long-lasting energy instead of a quick sugar rush followed by a crash. Almost no additives. Finally, medieval bread was incredibly simple. Basic bread contained just grain, water, salt, and the wild microbes in the sourdough starter. There were no preservatives, no emulsifiers, no artificial flavors, no bleaching agents, no added sugar or seed oils. The bread went stale more quickly, yes, but people baked regularly and often turned stale bread into soups, porridges, and stews. The result was a food that the human body easily recognized and knew how to use. Now that we understand how powerful medieval bread could be, let's walk through how it was actually made, step by step. To truly appreciate medieval bread, we need to imagine the rhythm of life behind it. The fields. In a small village, most bread began in open fields planted with wheat, rye, or barley. Instead of chemical fertilizers, farmers relied on animal manure, and crop rotations to keep the soil fertile. Weeds were removed by hand or with simple tools. Pests were controlled by birds, frogs, and other natural predators. The yields were lower than in industrial agriculture today, but the soil was alive, and the grains absorbed a rich mix of minerals. The harvest and storage. At harvest time, men, women, and even children went out with sickles, cutting the grain by hand. The stalks were bundled, dried, and threshed to separate the grain from the straw. The precious grain was stored in wooden barns or clay granaries, protected as best as possible from moisture, rodents, and insects. This grain would become the main security against hunger in the coming year. Milling. In many regions, villages had a community mill, powered by water or wind. People brought their sacks of grain and paid a small portion as a fee to the miller. The grain poured between two heavy stones, turning slowly, grinding the kernels into flour. The flour came out slightly warm, with a rustic smell and tiny flecks of bran throughout. Sometimes the flour was sifted to remove the larger pieces of bran, producing something closer to brown flour. But for most ordinary people, significant amounts of bran and germ remained in the final product. Mixing and kneading. Back in small kitchen spaces, often just a corner of a one-room house, the flour was mixed with water, a pinch of salt, and a portion of living sourdough starter. The dough was heavy and sticky. It needed strong hands and patience to knead, folding and pressing until the mass became smoother and more elastic. In some regions, this work was done by women of the household. In others, by professional bakers who prepared dough for entire neighborhoods. Fermentation. The shaped dough was left to rest and rise for many hours, sometimes all night. In winter, it might sit near the hearth, absorbing gentle warmth. In summer, it might rise in a cooler pantry to prevent over-fermentation. During this time, the microorganisms got to work, changing the dough in ways people couldn't see but could certainly taste. The next day, the dough had a slightly sour aroma, a soft, airy structure inside, and a surface ready to brown beautifully in the oven. Baking. Community bakehouses were common in medieval towns and villages. Instead of every home having its own big oven, a shared oven was fired to save fuel and labor. The baker or villagers heated the oven by burning wood directly inside until the walls soaked up intense heat. Then the ashes were scraped out and loaves were slid in with long wooden paddles. Inside that massive, enclosed heat, bread baked quickly, forming thick, crunchy crusts while the interiors remained moist. When the bread came out, the entire neighborhood smelled of roasted grain and wood smoke. Children waited eagerly for the first slices. For many families, this bread would be the backbone of every meal for the coming days. Now, after walking through this entire process, let's jump forward in time and see what changed. Over the last 2 centuries, industrialization transformed almost every step of bread making. Some of these changes increased efficiency and helped feed growing populations, but many of them quietly stripped bread of the qualities that once made it such a powerful food. 1. New wheat varieties and higher yields. In the 19th and 20th centuries, plant breeders focused on creating wheat that grew shorter, ripened faster, and produced much higher yields. These new varieties were perfect for large-scale farming with machinery, but higher yield often meant the nutrients in each grain were slightly diluted. At the same time, our diets became richer in calories from other sources, so bread was no longer treated as a primary source of nutrition, just a cheap filler. 2. Roller milling and refined flour. A major turning point came with the invention of steel roller mills. Unlike stone mills, these machines could spin very fast and separate the grain into three parts with great precision: bran, germ, and endosperm. The food industry quickly realized that white flour made from just the endosperm was softer, lighter, and could be stored longer because most of the natural oils had been removed. Consumers loved the bright white color because it was associated with wealth and purity. White bread became a status symbol. But nutritionally, this was a disaster. Removing the bran and the germ stripped away most of the fiber, vitamins, and minerals. The result was a product that digested quickly, behaved more like sugar in the body, and contributed much less to overall nutrition. Governments later required that some vitamins and minerals be enriched back into white flour, but even enriched flour does not fully match the complexity of natural whole grain. 3. Industrial yeast and speed. The next big change was in fermentation. Instead of slow, overnight sourdoughs, bakeries adopted commercial baker's yeast, which can inflate dough in a fraction of the time. This made bread production much faster and more predictable, a big advantage for industrial bakeries. But the quick rise meant there was little time for breaking down gluten and complex carbohydrates, reducing anti-nutrients like phytic acid, creating the complex flavors and organic acids that give sourdough its unique health benefits. In many modern loaves, fermentation is cut down to as little as 2 hours, or even less in some ultra-processed products. 4. Additives and processing aids. To make up for the lost flavor, texture, and shelf life, the modern bread industry leaned heavily on additives. Today's packaged bread may contain added sugar or high fructose corn syrup, vegetable oils or shortenings, emulsifiers to keep the crumbs soft, conditioners to speed up dough handling, preservatives to extend shelf life, artificial flavors or colors, and sometimes extra gluten to create a particular texture. Individually, many of these additives are considered safe in small amounts, but the overall picture is clear. We moved far away from grain, water, salt, and natural fermentation. 5. Ultra-soft textures and portion sizes. Finally, our expectations changed. We became used to bread that is extremely soft, airy, and sweet, with almost no chew or crust. This kind of bread digests very quickly. It's easy to eat large amounts without feeling truly full. Compare that to a dense medieval sourdough loaf. 2 slices of that heavy bread might keep you satisfied for hours. But with modern white sandwich bread, it's very easy to eat 4 or 5 slices and still feel hungry soon after. Of course, we don't live in the Middle Ages anymore. Most of us don't have stone mills, wood-fired ovens, or fields of ancient wheat outside our homes. But the principles behind medieval bread can still guide us to better choices. Here are a few practical lessons we can apply today. 1. Choose whole or minimally processed grains. Whenever possible, choose breads made from whole grain flour, or at least breads where whole grain is the first ingredient. Look for words like 100% whole wheat, whole rye, or stone ground. Be cautious of labels that simply say wheat bread or multigrain, because they can still be mostly refined flour with just a little bran added back. Whole grain bread will usually be darker, slightly heavier, and often more flavorful. 2. Prefer sourdough or long fermented breads. Seek out real sourdough, not just bread with sourdough flavor added. Authentic sourdough is made with a fermented starter, not only baker's yeast. It often has a slightly tangy taste and a chewy crust. If you have the time and interest, learning to bake sourdough at home can reconnect you directly with the slow, living process that made medieval bread so special. Even if you buy from a bakery, ask whether they use long fermentation. Some modern artisan bakers now ferment dough for 12, 24, or even 48 hours to develop flavor and nutrition. Keep the ingredient list short. Look at the label on packaged bread. A simple, nourishing loaf does not need 20 ingredients. Aim for breads that contain something like flour, ideally whole grain, water, salt, sourdough starter or yeast, maybe a small amount of seeds or honey. If you see a long list of preservatives, conditioners, and gums, you're looking at an ultra-processed product, very far from what our ancestors ate. 4. Treat bread as real food, not filler. In the Middle Ages, bread was treated with respect. It was the center of the meal, not an afterthought. We can bring back a little of that respect by pairing bread with other nutrient-dense foods. Soups made from bones and vegetables, stews of beans and meat, cheeses, fermented vegetables, olive oil or butter in modest amounts. A slice of good bread combined with real, whole foods can be incredibly satisfying. 5. Listen to your own body. Finally, remember that not everyone tolerates bread the same way. Some people feel great eating moderate amounts of sourdough whole grain bread. Others have medical conditions like celiac disease that require avoiding gluten completely.
I think I'll just have the salad
But
today.
even if your body doesn't do
The
well
lasagna
with
looks good,
wheat,
though.
the broader
still have the
lesson
soup
still
special?
stands. Foods that are closer to their natural form, prepared with time, patience, and living cultures, and eaten as a part of a simple, balanced diet, tend to support human health far better than foods engineered for speed, softness, and shelf life. So the next time you see a plastic bag of perfectly soft white bread, remember what we lost to make it that way: the whole grains, the long fermentation, the living cultures, and slow heat of a wood-fired oven. Medieval bread wasn't magic. It was simply real food, made from real grain, given enough time to become something our bodies could truly use. If you start looking for genuine sourdough, choose whole grains, or even try baking your own rustic loaf, you're already taking back a small part of that forgotten wisdom. If you enjoyed this journey into medieval kitchens and want more videos about the foods and survival tricks our ancestors used to stay strong, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next episode. Thanks for watching, and may your next slice of bread look a little more like the superfood it once was.